a very shocking reality to wake up to. Where do you think this all started, and how far did we go, and where do you think this will end? Is the conversation for today?
Well, thank you very much. Maybe the proximate start of this is the British Empire, because
Yes.
what America knows, it learned from Britain. Britain undoubtedly was an empire. At its peak, it controlled about one quarter of the inhabited land area of the world, and was extremely powerful and extremely nasty from my point of view. Uh,
100%.
I, I loved the British when I was young because they spoke such wonderful English. And they do. They speak better English than I do. It's their language, but Americans use it. Um, and that very wonderful language masked a lot of tremendous cruelty.
Yeah.
The British Empire was an extremely cruel empire, as empires are, very violent, very much determined to dominate, very much neglectful of the lives of those that the empire dominated, leaving millions of people to die in famines in Ireland in the 1840s or in India in the 1870s to 1890s, what's been called the late Victorian Holocausts. These were El Nino related famines, but then were supervised by harsh imperialists who didn't care as millions of Indians were dying. And of course, Britain pioneered in concentration camps in Africa, in many wars of conquest, in many cynical wars. The most cynical that I know of in modern history is the Opium War, so-called,
Exactly.
a
Yeah.
war on China to demand the right to export British opium, India-grown British opium, to China, where the Chinese authorities were perfectly clear this was leading to addictions and social problems, and it literally had as the one cause of war, Britain's demand that China accept
Yeah.
opium from
Get high
Britain.
or we will kill you.
Exactly, and become addicted under our demands. Well, all of this is, and another very cynical war was the Crimean War, which
Yeah.
I mentioned because the Crimean War was a war led by Britain to weaken Russia, to drive Russia, and especially the Russian fleet, from the Black Sea, and to weaken Russia sufficiently that Britain thought that Russia would then not threaten British imperial possessions. And one of their concerns, which was mostly delusional anyway, was that Russia would invade India through the Khyber Pass. And the Crimean War was a war to put Russia in its place. I call the current war in Ukraine the Second Crimean War,
Yeah.
because it's got almost an identical structural purpose, this time the US and the UK trying to put Russia in its place. So I start with Britain because the US took over the British style. And I would say that empire is an appropriate word, but the American empire is a different kind of empire. The American empire is an empire in the sense that the American government has actively determined who rules in other countries. It's
Yeah.
taken as a natural point that the US can overthrow another country's government if that other country's government is deemed to be inimical to US interests in some way. And there have been perhaps 100 covert regime change operations by the US, largely the CIA, but not only. And those have extended from 1947 until today. The lesson is that they get us into terrible crises and they get the target countries into prolonged instability and crises. And because they are, by design, deniable by the US government, there's almost no awareness or discussion of the underlying causes of such wars. And I'll give two examples. One is the Syrian war.
Yeah.
In general, Americans don't pay too much attention to the rest of the world anyway, but they may have heard that there's a war in Syria, and they would say, well, yes, because there's a Syrian despot, and that led to a civil war. I doubt that 1 in 1,000 would know that President Obama signed an order in 2012 to overthrow the Syrian government, and already in 2011 began to arm an insurgency to overthrow the Syrian government. I know from my diplomatic roles that a peace agreement was reached in 2012 to end the civil strife in Syria, but that the United States blocked it. So the war now has gone on for 14 years openly, from 2011 to, or 13 years to 2024, with hundreds of thousands of dead. Nobody in America knows.
Displaced.
Yes, nobody knows. Nobody cares. Nobody reports on it. Nobody knows the CIA role. Once in a while, we hear Vladimir Putin entered Syria in 2015 without even the minimal notice. Well, yes, the United States was there 4 years before. Thank you. So this is a typical kind of action. Another example to bring us closer to our immediate crisis is Ukraine. It is said by the mainstream media that the war in Ukraine started on February 24th, 2022, when Vladimir Putin, in an unprovoked manner, invaded Ukraine. This is a fantasy of a description. The war started 10 years ago. It started 8 years before its ostensible start date, because it started in February 2014. But people have short memories. Yeah. The U.S. overthrew a government February 22nd, 2014. The sitting president had the temerity to say that, this is sitting president of Ukraine, had the temerity to say that Ukraine would be neutral rather than a NATO country. And that was a cause for the United States to overthrow Yanukovych, together with extreme nationalist militaries and paramilitaries in Ukraine. And this installed an anti-Russian, indeed Russophobic regime in Kiev, and the war began then with breakaway republics and bombing, and then a negotiated settlement called the Minsk Agreements, which was repudiated by the US and the Ukrainians. So basic facts like the Syrian and the Ukrainian cases are not actually known or discussed in the United States, which is why you and I are surprised when we learn them, because these are big events. You would think that a newspaper like the New York Times, which has a storied reputation, would be doing investigative reporting, would find out what's the real story, would take pride in a Pulitzer Prize quality expose. Why did the U.S. overthrow a regime? Well, it's exactly the opposite. Not only do they not do that reporting, they block that reporting. They prevent it from happening.